I'd like to say, first of all, thank you for the very kind introduction. When I met George yesterday for the very first time, the very first thing he said to me, he looked me square in the eye and said, "You're a very handsome man." He was complimenting himself, I think, but I'll take it either way, that's fine. I'm glad you liked my responses to his 5 questions, because my talk isn't very funny. I have to apologize in advance, but there are some fairly heavy themes in here that we're going to talk about. There are a few gags in there, so see if you can spot them. So we're here to talk about the health and wellness industry. It's worth a lot of money, an estimated $4.4 trillion. This is worth more than the combined profits from the smartphone industry, the fast food industry, and all social media platforms together. So this is very big business. So profits derive from the sale of fad diets, exercise training programs, health club memberships, exercise equipment and technologies, dietary supplements, and of course, complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM. Now, what you might be thinking at this point is, well, with soaring rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes, surely this newfound emphasis on exercise and healthy eating is a good thing, right? Well, broadly speaking, it is, but the problem that we have is that the health and wellness industry is disturbingly unregulated. Let me give you some context. So consider the processes that underpin the availability of a new drug, okay? So in medicine, before a new drug is made available to patients, there has to be hard evidence of, first of all, efficacy. So that is the ability of the drug to exert an intended outcome, and also relative safety. Okay, so there are preclinical trials that usually take place in a lab, and then there are clinical trials that involve an increasing number of human subjects, maybe a few dozen at phase 1 to tens of thousands or more at phase 3, and then eventually the data will be assessed and reviewed and may be approved by the regulatory bodies. In the US, it's the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So in other words, there's a minimum threshold of evidence that has to be surpassed. But in the health and wellness industry, we are rarely dealing with drugs and medical devices, okay? So there is no minimum threshold of evidence. Manufacturers of these products have absolutely no obligation to evidence or science, and both of these things normally take a back seat to marketing rhetoric. So let's have a look at some examples. So first of all, we have the Luminosity company, who claimed that their brain training app could, quote, prevent Alzheimer's, that's a pretty major claim, and help students perform at school. And these claims were completely without merit, so the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, fined them $2 million. We have Coca-Cola, the makers of vitamin water, who claimed, again without evidence, that their product could promote healthy joints and reduce the risk of eye disease. We have New Balance, who claimed that their toning shoes could not just increase calorie expenditure, but obviously tone muscles of the lower body, claims that were also deemed to be fraudulent. We have green coffee bean extract that were featured on the Dr. Oz show as a, quote, magic weight loss product. It was also claimed that the capsules were clinically proven to help facilitate weight loss. They were not clinically proven. And lastly, we have the Power Balance bracelet that in the early 2000s, quote, harmonized with the body's natural frequencies to improve strength, wellness, and vitality. The product was endorsed and worn by a number of athletes and celebrities. They wore the bracelet on their wrist. That was until the Australian Consumer Commission deemed that Power Balance had engaged in misleading advertising, gave them a hefty fine, and the company eventually went bankrupt. Yeah, but, there's a but. What I've represented here is a tiny minority of companies that have actually been held accountable for their misleading claims. The vast majority are not. Now, the claims underpinning sports performance products have also been evaluated, in this case empirically. This 2012 study that was published in the esteemed British Medical Journal looked at over 100 different sports products and over 400 different sports performance claims. And what they found was that in more than half of cases, there was absolutely no evidence to support the claim being made. And when there was evidence, it was deemed to be at a high risk of bias 85% of the time. The authors concluded that there is, quote, a striking lack of evidence to support the vast majority of sports-related products. Now, some commercial health and wellness products are based on real medical treatments. And in these cases, manufacturers and online fitness influencers are co-opting and misappropriating the clinical data to make unfounded commercial claims. So let's have a look at a few examples now taken from a series called When Medicines Go Rogue that I recently published in Skeptical Inquirer. So first we have the intravenous nutrient drips. These are available in kiosks around the United States and a few other countries as well. They are essentially bags of saline or sodium chloride salt water that are infused with various vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. Now, as the name would suggest, they're taken into the body intravenously, so through a vein in the forearm, on the premise that bypassing the digestive system can help facilitate the uptake of these nutrients. Now, these particular products are priced somewhere between $200 and $500 each, and they're not advertised as clinical treatments. They're advertised to the mainstream to otherwise healthy individuals. And they have been endorsed by a number of celebrities, including Madonna, Brad Pitt, Gwyneth Paltrow, obviously, Rihanna, she's a singer. I barely know who she is, but apparently she's a big deal. And they've all endorsed this kind of therapy. Now, there are some clinical scenarios where an IV drip might be needed. So in cases of extreme malnutrition, extreme nutrient deficiency, if there's some kind of malabsorption issue in the gut following bariatric surgery, for example. And other scenarios where somebody might need an IV drip is following an endurance event. George and I were talking about triathlons earlier, and if an athlete somehow becomes severely dehydrated, or if they suffer an electrolyte imbalance, then they might need an IV drip. But in all of these scenarios, you have the therapy being administered by a qualified medical professional based on pre-existing clinical criteria, none of which are relevant in the commercial space. In fact, most of these treatments, they will state overtly in the small print that the drips are not intended to diagnose or treat any medical disorder, and it's not covered by medical insurance. Now, there's no scientific research on the efficacy of these drips, but we can look at the plausibility based on the typical ingredients. So here I've collated 4 different nutrient drips from one particular vendor: fitness drip, the detox drip, the immunity, and the energy drip. Now, you can see that the ingredients that are common to all of the drips are listed in white here. So we have B vitamins, potassium, calcium, bicarbonate, sodium chloride. Now, because these nutrients are common to all of the drips, we can deduce that they serve no specific purpose, right? And the key ingredient, or the key ingredients, are highlighted at the bottom. Let's just look at the fitness drip. Priced at $270, it contains additional L-carnitine and glutamine. So glutamine is the most abundant amino acid in the body. It's widely available in food. In fact, a chicken breast contains about 3 times the amount of glutamine that you'd get from the drip. And with respect to L-carnitine, decades of research has shown that supplementation with L-carnitine has absolutely no effect on fat metabolism, exercise performance, or weight loss. I actually contacted this vendor and asked them why they've included L-carnitine in the fitness drip, and they told me that L-carnitine, quote, activates the metabolism. It does not activate the metabolism, nor would activating the metabolism necessarily improve anyone's fitness. But of course, it's included here on the assumption that the consumer knows nothing about physiology or nutrition. The story is much the same for the other drips in that the key ingredients don't really contribute to the stated outcome. Okay, let's move on. We'll talk about methylene blue. This is a chemical compound that's been used in the clinical setting for a couple of decades. Its main application is in treating a condition called methemoglobinemia, which is when the red blood cells struggle to offload their oxygen to the various tissues and cells of the body. It's very rare, but potentially fatal. Another potential application of methylene blue is as a staining agent in microbiology. so in the study of animal cell components. And one 2016 study that you can see on the bottom of the screen here found that methylene blue might be used as an effective treatment for mitochondrial dysfunction in premature aging disease. So as you might expect, methylene blue is a controlled drug, and it must be prescribed by a physician. But this hasn't stopped fitness influencers around the world from extrapolating wildly from the clinical data, making all sorts of unfounded claims, like methylene blue can launch you into flow, enhance your productivity and focus, protect your memory, optimize your mitochondria. All claims that are, yeah, it's a mitochondrial optimizer, apparently. But these claims are all very vague and non-specific. But the problem is that if you take methylene blue in high enough concentrations, it can have very harmful side effects. It can cause serotonin toxicity. It has various drug interactions. It can cause respiratory, circulatory problems, even anaphylactic shock, which is potentially very serious. It can be fatal. So the idiotic blue-tongue selfies that you see here, they undermine the potentially very serious implications. Lastly, let's talk about supplemental oxygen. This has been used in medicine for over 100 years. Now, its main application is in any scenario where the body's ability to transport oxygen through the lungs and into the blood might be compromised. So the most obvious example is acute respiratory disease like COVID-19, which can cause pneumonia. Heart failure is another example. More chronic long-term respiratory disease like COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a subtype of which is emphysema, which is damage to the air sacs in the lungs. Or what about going to altitude, particularly exercising at altitude, where the air is thinner, we have reduced oxygen pressure, and it can be harder to breathe. Now, in all of these scenarios, giving somebody supplemental oxygen can help to increase the oxygen content of the blood. But various commercial vendors, again, have exploited the clinical data to sell canned oxygen. And this is, quote, 95% pure oxygen, which is clearly an oxymoron. But that aside, they claim that this spray can, if you inhale it periodically, a couple of times a day, can improve breathing, whatever that means, and improve your reaction time, even improve sports performance. Now, there's no scientific research on canned oxygen, but one particular manufacturer has published a press release that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen that they have mocked up to look like a scientific research paper. And so the unscrupulous nature of product marketing is really on display. And presumably they've done this to give the product some kind of scientific legitimacy. And it would work on a lot of people. And lastly, we have this pH-balanced oxygenated water, like this company here that recently secured $15 million worth of funding from athlete and business supporters, despite the fact that a number of scientific review papers all agree that claims for oxygenated water cannot be taken seriously. So it's becoming increasingly obvious that when it comes to commercial claims in the health and wellness industry, it's basically the Wild West. And we are all potential prey to the 21st century snake oil salesman. So this is an important question that we're going to be good skeptics and good critical thinkers. We need to try and tackle these difficult questions. Why do we fall for the shortcuts? Why do we continually fall for these quick fixes? Well, it's obviously multifaceted, it's very complicated, but a big part of the reason is that humans have evolved logic and reason for navigating hypersocial groups and for recognizing patterns in our environment. Now, these cognitive heuristics, these intuitions, once served a very important survival advantage for early humans, and so these traits have endured. But human lives and human genes are now incongruent. Although our genes are relatively unchanged since the time of hunter-gatherers, modern society is almost unrecognizable. It's changed dramatically, even in the last 40 or 50 years since the advent of the internet and social media. Our critical faculties are poorly suited to this environment that is saturated by big business, social media, fake news. And when you think that we are inundated every single day with so much data and so much information, literally available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at our fingertips on our smartphones, it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to distinguish information from misinformation and science from pseudoscience. In effect, we are using analog critical thinking skills to navigate a digital age. And marketing companies know this. They face stiff competition to capture our very limited attention span, so they resort to increasingly sophisticated marketing strategies and creative rhetoric in order to do that. Marketing companies have become expert psychologists, ones who understand our biases better than we do, and they use that information to sell us product. So whether they are exploiting our ingrained bias for natural products, you see food in the stores now, all natural ingredients, free from chemicals, despite the fact that nothing's free from chemicals. If it were, it wouldn't exist, right? Or maybe they're exploiting an irrational fear of genetically modified organisms, or the appeal to authority by affiliating with revered athletes, or invoking anecdotal appeals to emotion with these glossy before and after images. If there is a cognitive fallacy to be exploited, marketing companies will get there. And of course, this is all compounded by our rampant use of social media. So social media now is pervasive in modern society, and we're reading long-form text, books, magazines, newspapers, less and less. We're reading short-form text on social media more and more. Young people especially get most of their news and entertainment from their preferred social media outlet. But these platforms generate content based on the user's previous viewing history, right? So essentially, every time we use social media, we are curating our social media feeds with news, opinions, and entertainment that reinforce our pre-existing biases. So whether you are a staunch advocate of the Atkins fad diet, or a lifelong user of chiropractic or acupuncture, or you might be a flat earther, right? I'm sure there are a few of you in here. Or you might be an anti-vaxxer or a climate change denier or a religious extremist. Social media has the power to reinforce your existing ideologies and pit you against people with whom you might disagree, all because it promotes engagement. Athletes, revered athletes, and online fitness influencers have become very good at harnessing their social media followers for financial gain. So Cristiano Ronaldo, on the right-hand side here, arguably the most recognizable, talented, good-looking soccer player in the world, objectively speaking. He earns more than $40 million every year exclusively through his Instagram account, just through sponsorship. It's about $1 million a post. But it goes without saying that the individuals with the most power and influence on social media are often not the ones disseminating the best advice, leveraging their popularity to sell dietary supplements or ancient Chinese therapies, obscure taping strategies, or in Ronaldo's case, electrical muscle stimulation devices, none of which are evidence-based. So this combination of sophisticated marketing strategies, pervasive social media, and blunted critical faculties, it's a recipe for disaster. And it's one that can largely explain so many of the problems that we face as a society in 2022, not just in health and wellness, but beyond. So this is a question that I get more than any other. If these placebo products, these products that work only in the context of belief and expectation, if they make people feel better, then what's the harm? Yeah, what's the harm of using them? Well, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that there are consequences and there are risks to using products that are not proven to work. Okay? And there are some examples here from the scientific literature of injury and death that can occur following the use of alternative therapies and complementary alternative medicine. Now, of course, all medical treatments are associated with risks that are balanced by physicians in a risk-to-benefit assessment, yes? But when the benefits hinge on placebo, expectation, and belief, then the risks become very difficult to justify. The other thing that we have to remember is that it's impossible to restrict or confine placebo medicines to minor medical ailments and sport and exercise. If somebody really believes in the healing power of a placebo, sooner or later they're going to try and use it to treat something very serious. And sadly, the scientific literature and the mainstream media are littered with tragic examples. And there are websites, of course, like whatstheharm.net, with which I'm sure you're all familiar, that have collated hundreds of thousands of cases of injury and death that are associated with placebo medicines. Here I've highlighted the ones associated with meaningless detoxes and also energy medicine. If you've not seen What's the Harm, please go and check it out. It's very disturbing but very enlightening. But if we put alternative therapies and CAM to one side, there are still more mainstream health and wellness interventions, more conventional ones, that are ironically harming our health and our wellness. Think about the weight loss industry that comprises fad diets and weight loss supplements. Now, at the last count, this was valued at about $71 billion a year. This has been trending upwards. It's more than doubled since the 1990s. It's now reached an all-time high. And there are 45 million Americans every year that try some kind of diet, usually a fad diet. So if we're spending more on weight loss strategies than ever before, then how do we explain the obesity rates that are also higher than ever before? These have been trending upwards since the 1970s. And in the United States, 37% of the adult population are clinically obese. Not just overweight, but clinically obese. That's with a body mass index greater than or equal to 30. And in the next 10 years, this is predicted to reach more than 50%, so 1 in 2. So clearly, there's a disconnect between the profits and the claims from the weight loss industry and what we're seeing in terms of obesity and health on a population level. Now, a big part of the problem is that fad diets and other quick fixes, they don't get to the root cause of the problem. In other words, they don't teach people how to change their lifestyles in a sustainable way for the long term. So studies show that the vast majority of people that lose weight when they start some kind of fad diet, they tend to regain all the weight that they lost within 1 to 2 years. A third of people put on more weight than they originally lost. It's the after images that you don't see on social media. And because people tend to bounce from one fad diet to the next, decreasing and increasing and decreasing their body weight, this is called yo-yo dieting for obvious reasons. This is associated with all sorts of long-term psychopathologies, depression, binge eating, low quality of life, not to mention increased risk of cardiovascular disease, especially in women. So by investing time and money in unproven pseudoscientific quick fixes, in a very real way, we could be harming population physical and mental health. Now, the health and wellness industry is built on the idea, on the promise that there are simple solutions to complex problems. And I don't need to tell you guys this, but that's not how the real world works. And what I've presented so far is a pretty complex problem. So I don't have all the answers, but in the following slides, I at least hope to provoke some further discussion and to pave the path forwards. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, bad expression, but we need to continue to support and embrace the work of organizations like the Center for Inquiry, Skeptical Inquirer, who have been promoting science and reason since before I was born. And they do such important work, and they provide forums like this for the sharing of good ideas. We have to continue to support them. And by being here, we of course are. We have to continue to debunk misinformation and misinformed beliefs when we see them in the public square, being careful to do so respectfully and with facts and evidence, because you're more likely to be effective that way. But we have to appreciate the limitations of corrective messaging and the scenarios where it may actually not just not be effective, but where it may actually do more harm than good, like trying to debunk somebody's staunch political or ideological beliefs. And in those scenarios, we need to lean more heavily on, I guess, more modern, more sophisticated strategies like pre-bunking, preemptively debunking misinformation by teaching people what to look out for, or so-called inoculation theory, where people become exposed to weaker forms of misinformation to prepare their minds for more profound pseudoscience, in much the same way that we prime the immune system with vaccines. And this really is the future of skepticism. And lastly, and this is perhaps the most important thing, I truly believe that being able to critically evaluate data and information, to critically appraise it, and come to an educated, informed opinion on something, it's a fundamental duty of a responsible member of a civilized society. And by doing this is how we can all contribute in a meaningful way to the society in which we live. But currently, there is absolutely no emphasis on critical thinking in schools, colleges, or universities. And so we are generating graduates without these important skills ingrained. A radical shake-up of our current educational priorities is needed. Now, skeptics have been banging this drum for decades, and there's not really been any change. And we can no longer be content with these ambiguities of purpose and timing. So that's why, here at SciCon, we have established something of a critical thinking task force, a group of individuals, of which I'm one, and we are organized by the brilliant and tenacious Natalia Pasternak. Where is she? She's at the back somewhere. Yeah, sure, why not? And she's pulled everyone together, and the aim of this task force is to design and hopefully agree upon a critical thinking syllabus and create a roadmap that we hope will eventually see it integrated into formal education at schools, colleges, and universities, so that the graduates of tomorrow have these skills ingrained regardless of their major or their chosen career path, because that's so important. And I'd like to go a step further. I'd like to put a stake in the sand here at SciCon. In my field of sport, exercise, health, and wellness, I intend to lead this charge so that current and future generations can navigate or have a chance of navigating this vastly commercial industry without fear of being deceived on an intellectual level or cheated on a financial one. I will finish appropriately with this quote from the late James the Amazing Randi: "No amount of belief makes something a fact." I'm sure you'll agree that this principle, it's just so important to every aspect of modern culture. It really cuts to the core of what it means to be a skeptic in 2022. And in my opinion, it's the very first thing that we should be teaching individuals on their lifelong journey into critical thinking. Thank you for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the conference.